It's another edition of the Gallardo podcast, so we take another dive into the world of Argentine football to discuss the latest news from Buenos Aires. Whether you're listening on YouTube, iTunes or SoundCloud, be sure to like, follow, subscribe or whatever it is that you can show us that you're out there. Hello, welcome back for episode 2. If you did listen to the first one, welcome back. If you're a new listener, we're glad to have you. This is the second episode of the Gallardo podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined once more by the ever-knowledgeable Tom Robinson.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure to have made it this far, and like Scaloni, we've made it to 2. Let's see if we can keep it going a bit further.
Yes, indeed, and the next man might help to push it along a bit more. Our special guest to help with this discussion, a man maybe as synonymous with South American football as dogs on the pitch and dodgy officiating, Mr. Tim Vickery.
Lovely to be here. Lovely to be in harness with a Coates and a war baby. So let's kick the ball around.
Lovely. All right, so we'll jump straight in. Obviously, after a week of international football and a sort of start of a new era, as many people would describe it, for Argentina. Lionel Scaloni, as the interim boss, oversaw a 3-0 win over Guatemala and a goalless draw with Colombia in the US. Tim, what did you make, first of all, of this messy-less Albiceleste?
Yeah, well, the first point I want to make is one of the reasons I'm so happy to do this is I really want to tap your knowledge because I would assume that you've seen a lot more of this than I have. I didn't see the Colombia game. I saw the Guatemala game. But on a very dodgy internet thing that had a kind of photo image put over in order not to get cut off. So my vision of the thing was somewhat blurred. Having said that, I studied it closely, had a close look at what was going on against Guatemala, and I was very, very interested. And I didn't expect to be impressed, and I was impressed. And what especially impressed me was that it was a scratch side. I think he had 5 senior debutants in the starting lineup and another 6 coming off the bench in the second half. After just a few training sessions, there was a clear idea of a team there. After all of the chaos that we've had over the last few years, that was I found that very, very interesting and very refreshing and very unexpected. And I really didn't expect to see a team that was very clear about what it was trying to do in possession. And the first half was exceptional against, admittedly, opponents who were outgunned technically and physically. But just to see the existence of a clear idea of play, well executed, was a big feather in the cap of Scaloni.
Yeah, I totally agree with Tim there. I think straight away, Scaloni's managed to achieve something that Sampaoli never really got to grips with. Despite a lack of playing experience together, there was nice directness. I think after the game he spoke about he didn't want to just have possession in vain. He wants to win the ball high up the pitch, closer to goal. He wants those quick transitions and a bit of verticality, to use a bit of a horribly translated phrase, which is I think describes what he was doing. And certainly in both games, I thought the first halves were really impressive in terms of trying to stamp down a new identity for this young, hungry group of players. And obviously in the second half, you've got a lot of changes. Maybe they're not quite able to maintain that intensity for a full 90 minutes. But no, I think Tim's right in saying that most people would look at this game and think, okay, Argentina against Guatemala, you're not really going to learn too much from that. But I think there was something to be gained from it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was a lot of positives there. It's certainly highlighted more so by how bad things have been probably over the last couple of years. And it was so refreshing to see, as Tim mentioned, those new faces. Who did you think stood out for you, Tom?
Well, I mean, obviously we had goals from the three Gs, all left-footed strikes from Gonzalo, Piti Martinez, Gio Lo Celso, and Gio Cholito Simeone. So I think that was nice for those guys to get on the score sheet, and particularly that midfield partnership of Lo Celso and Paredes, who, these are guys who've been involved in the squad before, but Lo Celso didn't get an absolute look in at all at the World Cup, and I think they worked well together. Lo Celso got that beautifully taken goal, and he also won the penalty, which I think was a bit fortunate, but he was sort of providing not only good use of the ball, but also popping up with crucial contributions around the box. And I think him and Paredes just moved the ball really well, let the ball do the work rather than the kind of very slow pedestrian midfield that we saw at the World Cup. So I was impressed with them, and I was glad to see Gio Simeone get a goal as well.
Yeah, and of course, I think one of the big names to have really emerged from it has been Ezequiel Palacios from River. Tim, I'm sure you've seen a fair bit of him at River, and certainly in that first half against Guatemala and again against Colombia, he impressed. What do you make of him?
I think he's interesting, and he's very, very strong on the ball. But I think his task was massively eased by playing in a midfield that functioned. And I go along with Tom. The stars of the show for me were Paredes and Lo Celso. I thought Paredes was the team, and he came off at half-time, and that was it, really. And Ascasiba came on and has his virtues, but they're not the virtues that Paredes has in terms of moving the ball so well. I couldn't understand the absence of Paredes from the World Cup squad, and even less could I understand the fact that I think Lo Celso was the only outfield player who didn't get on the field. He did pretty well in the warm-up game. It was Haiti, wasn't it? The only warm-up game that they had in the end. Going back to this coaching situation overall, and I did a lot of radio before the World Cup where people were saying that Sampaoli is entitled to consider himself the best coach going to the World Cup. And I said, well, that may be. I've seen a lot of his sides and they can be very exciting. But I think in terms of taking charge of Argentina, of all the 32, he's probably the worst. So, because there was absolutely no fit between the idea that Sampaoli had and the resources that he had at his disposal. And also in his track record working with Chile's under-20 side was very, very poor as well. And exactly what Argentina need now is someone to manage that kind of transition. So where we move forward from here, I think is very, very interesting. And the one thing that really did stand out for me, looking at the Guatemala game, is thinking, yes, this idea of play works very, very well against Guatemala. Getting the ball forward quickly to the wide spaces, and the wingers had a field day, because there were both Pavon and Martinez were so often receiving the ball in space behind the line. However, if you're thinking of this against the good teams, then you're wondering, well, what happens when the move breaks down? Because the team could be stretched out. And the big question for me, I think, from Argentina's future, as well as who's going to take charge, but whoever it is going to take charge, what are they going to do with the defence? Because I still look at the defensive resources and I don't see anything solved there at all. And I don't see Rulli as a goalkeeper. I certainly don't see Funes Mori as an international centre back, and I can't see a lot there at the moment. So that I think is whoever comes in, they are going to be the questions that they'll have to deal with, and Scaloni will have to deal with these next month against Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, last time when I was talking to Tom, the defence was obviously, as we were going through Scaloni's squad and some of the options that weren't even there, it was obviously, as always, the defence and the fullbacks that came under most criticism, or there was the biggest shortage. And unfortunately, as you said, I think the best performance was that first 45 minutes or so against Guatemala, but it was a game in which the defence didn't have anything to do really whatsoever.
Indeed.
And someone like Renzo Sarabia at right back, who had a good game, was able just to basically play as a second winger almost, overlapping Pavon or getting forward. To go back to sort of Sampaoli, would you say, though, maybe in his defence, that the job now is a bit easier given that the likes of Mascherano have retired, Messi obviously didn't make himself available, so a refreshing of the squad was kind of forced on the new manager, whereas I think, could you argue that maybe Sampaoli would have faced a mutiny had he come straight in and dropped the likes of Mascherano?
Well, he did. He did drop him, and he played him in a back three as well. So he didn't really know what to do. I don't really partake of this Mascherano bashing that went on in Argentina. His legs had clearly gone, but I still think he was one of the best passing midfielders that they had. I think that his passing has consistently been underrated, and the chance that Messi had against France was Mascherano winning the ball and feeding him. There seemed to be an implication that he was the embodiment of all ills with Argentina, and I never saw it that way. And I think the role that he played off the field was pretty laudable as well, because I think it was clearly Mascherano who was playing a vital role in just thinking, for crying out loud, can we do it simple? Because the Croatia game was just an absolute disaster, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And whatever you think about what happened with Argentina afterwards, they clearly improved. Just by let's just have an orthodox back four with fullbacks as fullbacks and centre backs as centre backs, and play it from there. And I think Mascherano was the key figure in that. So clearly, I think he was around for too long, and should have been replaced earlier. Could have been replaced earlier, and perhaps. Because the movement of the ball of Paredes is so good, but you wonder, against better teams, can he defend? Ascasibar and Mascherano has appointed him as his potential successor, but can he pass the ball? Can he pass the ball constructively? So maybe there was a lack of. And remember, Ascasibar had done pretty poorly in a couple of tournaments. I know he was a very, very young player, but hadn't managed to justify the hype in the couple of tournaments that he played with Argentina at youth level. So perhaps that there wasn't one candidate who was capable of doing everything that Mascherano could do. And perhaps had there been more continuity of coaching, it would have been easier to have gone through a kind of planned rebuilding structure. But I certainly don't see Mascherano as the embodiment of all of the side's ills.
No, I think he's one of that generation, I guess, who's lumped in, and obviously I think ends up becoming almost a figurehead for that. But you could also put in the likes of Aguero and Higuain, Di Maria.
One of the problems maybe is that Argentine domestic football has declined, as South American club football has in general. It's declined so much in quality that sometimes it's too easy for reputations to be built up. And Craneviter, I was hearing how great Craneviter was, and you see him, and well, maybe he's going to get there, but he was nowhere near. And when they put him in for Mascherano, you don't see any real presence there at all. I would argue the same with Funes Mori. I think he was lauded on River Plate winning the Libertadores with a team that couldn't hold a candle to River Plate teams who'd won the competition in the past. And that decline of domestic football in South America, that can make it difficult, I think, for coaches to bring players in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the issue about Funes Mori is an interesting one, because he's obviously a player that you've written plenty about and had to sort of defend certain opinions, which I went too far. I went too far in him. I got carried away with it. But we all do. There's
a point to be made here, because in the end, I was getting attacked by Everton fans for being too nice to him. Honestly. Yeah. And I just read, when the squad was called up, and I think this was Ole, the daily sports paper, going through one by one who's been called up, and they referred to Funes Mori's excellent spell with Everton. And you just wonder by what criteria centre-backs are judged, and goalkeepers. And any goalkeeper who seems to fortuitously get in the way of a shot is lauded as a miracle maker in Argentina. And I worry sometimes about the criteria that are being used to judge players in these positions.
Yeah, I think with Funes Mori, it's definitely a case of just such a paucity of talent there at centre-back that they're just desperate for anyone to look decent, and the fact that people are pointing to these 2 clean sheets as a sign of Argentina's defensive renewal, I think is a little bit exaggerated. I think
apparently he dropped a brick against Colombia, didn't he?
He'll do that. He'll do that at least one time a game.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was interesting that they brought in Walter Samuel to come in, and Scaloni spoke very highly of his ability to influence the defence. I think maybe Petzela is one
Perhaps.
who we could see a bit more of, but for me, it's all about Mamana when he comes back to fitness. He's the guy I really want to see in there as the dominant ball playing centre half. Really, I think the sooner they can move on from Funes Mori, the better. But yeah, it was interesting that they managed to hold on. Well, not hold on against Colombia, because I thought they were actually, if you took it a boxing analogy, they probably won that first half on points. And Ospina happened to be in relatively decent form, another player who can kind of come in good spells and not so good ones. So I think in terms of the defence, there's still a lot really to discover about who is going to be the future going forward. And yeah, if these 2 friendlies didn't really represent a true answer either way.
No, what do you make, for example, of Tagliafico? You got the captain's armband, but I've always looked at him and think, I don't rate him as a marker at the top level. He seems to mark from long range at the top level, and I think that was exposed in the World Cup. He's now the captain. Is he the best they've got? Is there no one else there? No one springs to mind as an alternative. But do you have that opinion of him, or do you have more faith in him?
Well, I think, firstly, on the captaincy, if you looked at that squad that Scaloni's taken, I think Funes Mori was the player with the most caps there, with about 18 caps. So that showed you just, I think, going forward, the captaincy is obviously going to go to one of the more experienced players when they're integrated back into the side. But yeah, Tagliafico, he's the best that Argentina have got right now. On the previous pod, we were talking about what other potential options at left back, and you've got Marcos Acuna, who's not really a left back.
He's not a left back, is he? No.
And apart from that, there are really very few. I think we mentioned Gabriel Rojas at San Lorenzo as someone who might be interesting to watch. But other than that, you're kind of looking at guys who've tried Europe and failed and not really hit the heights, like Jonathan Silva or Insua maybe. So Tagliafico, for me, I think Ajax is kind of his level, and he'll be good if he's got a decent setup around him and he gets forward and he's got the flexibility to play as a third centre back as well. I think it's interesting as well when you look at the partnerships around the field, and there is a strong Independiente core to the squad as well as River. So I think maybe his relationship with the likes of Bustos, Alan Franco, another interesting young centre back.
Agreed.
I think he'll be in there, and he seemed to have slotted into the group before the World Cup quite well. I saw him play in the Italy friendly, and he was good. So I don't think he's ever going to be in the likes of Sorin or anyone like that. But for now, he's definitely the best that they've got.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are a real lack of candidates, certainly at left back, as we did point out last time. And I do think the captaincy was more out of circumstance than anything else. Because I mean, I did read that Romero was going to be captain, and until he was not risked, I don't think, in the friendlies, which is why Tagliafico ended up with the armband. But I don't think in the next squad, even once we might see the likes of Otamendi or Messi even come back, I don't think we'll see Tagliafico with the armband there. But I mean, I think he's
my interpretation of the Romero situation, and I might be wrong. You're much closer to it than I am, but my interpretation of him just calling up Romero was Scaloni jumping up and down and saying, "I'm not Sampaoli."
Yeah, I mean, possibly. I mean, where do you stand on Romero in general, Tim? Do you think it's time for them to move on, or do you still see him as the best option?
I think I'd be tempted to go with Armani short term.
Yeah.
And hope. And Armani's good. He's not great. Romero has spent so long on benches that. But I thought it was a nice move just to call him up.
Yeah, I know what you say. I think
Sampaoli made a huge mess. An appalling mess. I think you got three goalkeepers. and you can substitute 24 hours before the first game, why drop him like that? Why do it? And that just makes all the players look around and thinking, well, that's how he's treating someone who's been first choice for a decade.
Yeah.
I thought it was a terrible, terrible piece of man management.
Yeah, and someone who, by all accounts, is quite an important figure in the dressing room as well.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was a terrible PR move from Sampaoli. And Armani, I think, over these two friendlies has probably shown why, as Tim said, for the short term, he's probably the best option. He is in good form for River, and he made a couple of decent saves, although one was a product of a poor kick out that he did. But really, it's someone who I've been rooting for so long now. I've been a really big fan of him ever since his days at Estudiantes, but I don't know, he just hasn't really kicked on. I think I saw a stat earlier today that he's led to no goalkeeper in La Liga over the last 4 seasons has created as many errors that have led to goal scoring opportunities or something along those lines, which suggests he hasn't really kicked on in the way we hope. I think he's worth having in the squad and to maybe give him a bit of confidence and see if he can get back up to the form he had a few years ago. But yeah, goalkeeper is one of those positions where there's enough guys who'll do, and I think there's talk about Esteban Andrada, the Boca keeper, coming in for the next set of friendlies. But there's no real outstanding candidate. So for now, I think it's Armani. Peter, I was going to ask, what did you make of the Colombia game then?
I think in a lot of ways, against better opposition, it was quite similar to Guatemala in that the first half I thought was quite promising, albeit it kind of petered out a little bit. But I thought, again, the midfield was impressive. And as we've sort of said already, there was an urgency that was sort of lacking and a pressing that trying to win the ball sooner that we haven't seen in a while. And just sort of looking to get the ball forward, that first pass going forward quicker, which was promising. I think all the changes, as ever in these kind of friendlies, sort of ends up making the second half a bit of a training exercise. And Argentina definitely lost their way. And during the second half, it wasn't a great deal to really comment on. I thought Armani then showed that he's a decent enough keeper, which I think is good for him, because I think after the World Cup he got a lot of stick, somewhat unfairly, I think, just on the basis of one game. But I think a lot of people that don't watch South American football kind of wrote him off as just an awful goalkeeper, which I think was a bit harsh. So I think he did himself some good. But I mean, on the whole, I think given it was against a decent level of opposition, I thought it was another positive.
But I think we're missing the main point here is the Icardi Dybala scenario. I mean, Icardi got most of the game, didn't score yet again, and Dybala got less than a half. I mean, I know he didn't have too much time to train, and Scaloni sort of handled the questions after the game quite well, I thought. But yeah, I was expecting that this was going to be the two games that both could really put down a marker for their roles as key members of the national team going forward, but it didn't really happen. Tim, what do you make of the whole, first Icardi and then Dybala?
I'm a little bit nonplussed by it, to be honest. I mean, part of this is how do you rate Simeone? And Simeone, I wonder if he's a rabbit killer. I wonder if he's a proficient goal scorer against weak opposition, but I wonder if he's going to do enough against the strongest opposition. In which case, he's probably not your long-term centre forward. Icardi is a player, and because he grew up in Spain, didn't he? Really, I mean, I've never quite understood why he set so much store on being Argentine. Grew up in Spain and after that has been in Italy. So he's not a player that I saw on the way up. So I don't know. And Inter Milan, all right, he's been carrying Inter Milan. I hope he has an extremely bad day on Tuesday against Tottenham. I haven't seen enough of him really firing. I've mainly seen him with Argentina. When you think, well, what's all the fuss about? And with Dybala, the obvious problem with Dybala previously, I always thought, was Messi. How do you fit both of them into the same starting lineup? And he's always one that worried me a little bit, even from his time with Instituto, because I remember the first time I became aware of him was that year that River were in the second division, that season. And so his two games there were the games against River, home and away. And he had two very poor games. And that just put a little question mark in my mind. What is he? Is he a little bit flaky in terms of temperament? And I have to admit that I was surprised when he did so well initially in Italy. When he jumped straight from there, without passing through a first division club in Argentina, going straight to Serie A. I didn't expect so much so soon from him. But again, still on the big occasion, you worry a little bit about him. So I'm a little bit nonplussed with both of them. I don't really know what to make of either of them.
Yeah, well, I think that's fair, certainly on what they've produced so far in admittedly a very short number of games for Argentina. But I mean, for me, I think with Icardi, it would have been nice for him to be able to, if he had been fit enough to start against Guatemala, because I think the longer he doesn't score for Argentina, the sort of worse the situation is. There's more people talking about the fact that another game where Icardi didn't score. And I think, as we talked in the pod before the game, and we sort of said he didn't have a great deal of chances, and then under Sampaoli came into the side in really, really poor circumstance. It would have been nice if he had played against Guatemala and maybe got that goal, even if it wouldn't have made a great difference to the team or the result, but it would have at least got that monkey off his back, so to speak. And we could have then sort of gone forward, assuming, okay, well, he's the number 9.
What's the mood in Argentina around Lautaro Martinez?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's rightly regarded as probably the best talent to have come out of the country, arguably since Agüero left Independiente. I mean, I think that's how highly a lot of people would talk about Lautaro. Whether or not that means he's ready to be Argentina's main man is another question. But I certainly think, were it not for his injury this time, that people would have wanted to see him at some point during those two friendlies with a view of kind of seeing where he fits in going forward.
Because the big advantage of the situation now is that there is time, isn't there? There's time when the serious stuff is still a year away. So there is time to blood people and give them confidence.
Yeah, and they've gone from having one of the oldest, or certainly one of the oldest squads in Russia, and suddenly that average age last week came down by about 6 years. So they've got a core there that they can at least start to build around, as you say, with the long term. I know there's obviously a Copa America next year, but looking further forward to 2022, there is a much younger group there to start building around.
Yeah, certainly. I think with Lautaro, he's someone that I think probably I'd say since Lo Celso, he's definitely the best young player that I've seen coming out of Argentina, and he's got that real hunger and just he's so professional in terms of improving himself. You see that kind of Cristiano Ronaldo-esque trait in his personality. Not to say that he'll ever go on and be quite as ruthless and lethal as Cristiano, but he's got that just hunger and desire that you don't see that often. And I really think that he is someone that the national team will be built around. Not just yet, but I think, like you said, it's a good chance to blood him. Again, Pavon's another one who he didn't have his best game against Guatemala. He got a lot of options, but we kind of saw maybe his lack of finishing. He has scored goals in abundance lately, but he's not the finished article yet. But those guys both give you a lot of directness, pace, and I think they're both going to be key guys. And I was a bit disappointed not to see Angel Correa feature, because I think he was someone who was unlucky to be not around the squad for the World Cup, and he's someone who I think could fit in. He adds that versatility that maybe he could fit into a 4-4-3 or a number of formations, 4-2-3-1, in the same way that Dybala, they seem to struggle to get him into a 4-3-3 because he's not really offering you the width that you'd want. So it's going to be interesting, but I think that's, as is always the case, there's plenty of options up front for Argentina.
Yeah, I think it was a slight knee injury that ended up ruling out Correa from certainly the second game, I think, if I remember correctly. So they didn't risk him. But we mentioned previously that Correa with Simeone were probably the two stars from the under-20 side a couple of years back. Tim, you've obviously talked at great length about the real problem at the youth level with Argentina, and how it's sort of been rather neglected, and it kind of really that conveyor belt of talent coming through to the senior team has really dried up. Do you think that there are signs of promise there, and do you think the AFA look like they're actually trying to address that in some way, given that maybe Scaloni came promoted from the under-20s anyway?
Well, I think that the big sign of promise is that they've recognised that it's a problem and they want to do something about it. But I don't think it happens overnight. And the decline didn't happen overnight. And I always remember when Argentina won the Olympics in 2008, afterwards, from a position of strength, Batista, the coach, who said, our youth work is in real problems. And that was at a point when Argentina were the reigning champions at under 20 level. And how Batista's words have been borne out. I don't know the exact causes, and part of this clearly is just producing to sell. But when I look at at some positions, when I look at Argentina's goalkeepers, I think their training methods, they must be wrong. Because I look at Argentina's goalkeepers and I think, from a technical point of view, they're often terrible. They're often good on personality. They can be strong personalities, but their technique sometimes just seems to be all over the place. So you wonder what on earth is happening. They just look so untidy. So, what is happening in youth training? And clearly, putting that right and getting that you will obviously always find talent coming through. And we mentioned Lo Celso, wonderful player. That there have been good players coming through from occasional good players from that youth setup, like Correa, perhaps Simeone, and Lautaro Martinez. Maybe Foyt, but I wonder. I don't know if his move was premature, and I wonder if he's ever going to be quick enough. The lad who went from Estudiantes to Tottenham. So there will always be some players coming through. But on a consistent level, you just look at the technique in certain positions, particularly defensive positions, and you wonder what on earth has been going on in the youth development divisions.
Yeah, as well as the obvious economic factors that you mentioned, I think there was a big case of Argentina resting on its laurels as far as having had such a successful time, ever since Peckerman's introduction in '94, I think it was, and they were just sort of hoovering up. And I think after that 2007 under-20 World Cup win with Agüero, Di Maria, Banega, and then that Olympics, like you mentioned, even though there were people within the game who were mentioning it, I just don't think they really woke up and smelt the coffee. So I think players have just been coming through despite the system, not because of it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's finally, as we saw, a wasted cycle. I mean, you can point to so many different factors. Certainly that long-term neglect of the youth team. Also just the short-termism within the AFA, the death of Grondona, opening up this big vacuum and no one really taking power, and Martino throwing in the towel 2 years ago, and since then it's just been looking for quick fixes just to get them to that next tournament. So I mean, it's just a myriad of problems, and the quality of the local league. I mean, I think Valdano spoke very well of this during the World Cup, and people are more looking for huevos instead of using the balls. Where are the Riquelmes coming through?
That's South American domestic football. That's what it's become. It's the same dynamic in Brazil. As it loses quality, the more and more emphasis is put on drive and will to win and winning any way you can.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's so many reasons why we can point to that, and just the sort of centralization of modern football around Europe is certainly not helping that. But I think what these two friendlies have shown, that there is still talent there. It's raw. It's making up for lost time. But hopefully with the likes of Scaloni, Aimar, Placente, and some decent young coaches coming through in the Superliga as well, I think hopefully they will start to address that. And even if it does take maybe more than one World Cup cycle, then hopefully by the time Qatar rolls around, Argentina will actually be in a stronger position. And I mean, it's just one of those issues where Argentina is always going to be seen as a favourite despite the level of talent. And certainly if Messi's in the team, they're going to be considered by your casual football fan as one of the favourites. But I think anyone looking at the World Cup had no hope at all of Argentina going beyond, maybe the quarterfinals at best. But certainly I think round of 16 was about where they went. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. And Peter, what do you think about Scaloni? Do you think he's the man for Argentina?
Well, I mean, I don't think he did his chances any harm, put it that way. I'm still not convinced the AFA will look at him as anything other than just an option if nothing else comes to fruition. I think they're going to explore a lot of other avenues first, and then maybe if they get knocked back enough, then they'll turn to Scaloni, which unfortunately I think is how they do a lot of their hiring. They draw up this long list with the usual suspects at the top, get knocked back by them, and then eventually work their way down. I mean, Sampaoli was probably maybe an exception to that, and it didn't work out. So it might be a rethink. But I mean, I think it's frustrating that the sort of Sampaoli was such a disaster, because I think the restructuring of the youth levels at the same time when they did bring in Scaloni and Aimar and Placente, as you mentioned, it at last seems as though they looked at the whole picture and sort of put these coaches in place with a clear idea of progression of players going from the under 17s into the under 20s, eventually working their way up. So I mean, it would be a gamble if they were down to just to move to Scaloni, but when you look at some of the options, the realistic options anyway, you do sort of wonder, who do Argentina turn to next? I mean, Tim, we obviously know the usual suspects, as I alluded to, who won't come near the job. Who do you think Argentina look to?
I've absolutely no idea, but I think that the Scaloni situation, a couple of things have fascinated me here. One was the interview that he gave at the press conference when he announced that squad, when he was clearly talking with the aim of wanting to stay, wasn't he? I was expecting just the humble discussion of a caretaker, instead of which, he was giving us long theoretical lectures about football and the need for verticality, and that's the way that football's going. And we got to win the ball and within 3 or 4 seconds be in a position to shoot. And that's the kind of style that I like, and I'm going to be implanting in Argentina. They weren't the words of someone who thinks of himself as a caretaker coach. That's someone who's looking far, far beyond. But I mean, we've talked about the kind of short-termism. To have this discussion prior to the game against Brazil, I think is pretty much a fruitless exercise. Because if Argentina get a beating in that one, then if they can win, then that really strengthens Scaloni's hand, which is perhaps a very stupid way of doing it, isn't it? But it's exactly what you don't want. Short-term considerations to determine this long-term decision. But that's the way that football works, and that's the way that South American football increasingly works. So I think the stakes are very, very high for this game against Brazil next month. And I'll be fascinated to see how Scaloni lines up. And we pretty much know what Brazil are going to do, I think. Because Brazil are a different situation, very different situation from Argentina, in that they've got to win the Copa America. And for Argentina, it's a warm-up tournament. And it is for most. You know, I saw that Gomez in Ecuador is already getting in trouble because he's saying it's a warm-up tournament. But realistically, it will be for most. That's its role now in the calendar. The hosts have to treat it differently. So Brazil have made far fewer changes from their World Cup lineup. And actually, I think the main change they've made has been a more cautious one, just to balance their team out a little bit. There ain't no such thing as a friendly. It's not going to be a friendly. What will Scaloni do? You know, because as we were saying earlier, if he goes for this, let's get the ball forward as quickly as possible, then he's running the risk of space opening up against one of the quickest counter-attacking teams in the world. And you look at that defensive unit. Oh God! I was in the stadium for Brazil-Argentina in World Cup qualification, and Otamendi and Funes Mori couldn't catch Brazil to throw sand at their backsides. You know, I mean, so with the defensive unit he's got out there, you would really, how are they going to get near? And Tagliafico trying to get close to Douglas Costa. No, forget about it. So what would Scaloni do? Does he go with Paredes and try and play, or does he go with Ascasibar and just try and hang off the crossbar and perhaps play on the counter attack himself? It's a game already that I can't wait for the kickoff.
Yeah, maybe Tagliafico doesn't want to get too close to Douglas Costa after his behaviour. But yeah, I imagine we'll see a much more defence-minded side, and I could definitely see maybe Ascasibar and Paredes as kind of a doble cinco at the base of midfield, and certainly trying to maybe more counter-attack Brazil, but without leaving those spaces. But easier said than done when they've got such a ropey back line. Peter, any other possible candidates you can think of? There's a few that are being mentioned in the Argentine press.
Yeah, I mean, obviously since Sampaoli first went, and we had the ludicrous usual stories of Guardiola and Simeone, Pochettino, which I think we could all agree are three that definitely won't be coming. We're now dealing with that group, the next group down. There's a lot of familiar faces that are now getting linked. I mean, they're now discussing or mentioning at least a possible return for Tata Martino. And then obviously the name Peckerman is floated around every now and again. And then nearer the time when Sampaoli first left, they were even talking about Sarella maybe getting him as some sort of role. So, I mean, it seems as though any of those going back would seem to be going backwards rather than building something for the future. Even though I think Martino was perhaps a little unfortunate. So really, then you're looking at maybe Gallardo as the only option, a realistic option in those circumstances. I mean, Tim, what do you make of some of the links to Argentina, those that I've just mentioned?
In Brazil and Argentina, it's hard for people to realise that the top coaches don't want to coach national teams. You know, you just don't get that in Europe. If you're a top coach, you want to be in the Champions League, and the national team is for rookies or veterans. So it's hard for them, I think, to understand that the chances of Simeone and Pochettino and Guardiola, jumping off the Champions League and coming to coach the Argentine national team. It's difficult for them to understand how unlikely that is, I think. Gallardo intrigues me because he's clearly shown at River that he knows how to set up a team in a number of different ways. And I wondered about him at first. I thought he was just a kind of like 4-3-1-2 man. With his number 10 and that was it. He couldn't really do anything else. He's since shown that he can, but the step up of players for and against in national team football is so huge that you are running a risk giving someone like that a national team job. But he knows it as a player. And I would imagine that Argentina could do a lot worse than Gallardo. I've seen people Almiron. I couldn't really understand why Almiron was getting the praise that he was at Lanús, because everything that I saw with his Lanús side, I thought he inherited. I thought it was all there from previous coaches. So and subsequently, I don't think his time with Atlético Nacional has done him any great favours. So I'm not quite sure why he is his name has been thrown about. But you're there on the ground, Pete. Who do you think are the best domestic choices?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Gallardo is the outstanding candidate domestically. I certainly think he's shown more, as you say, versatility in setting teams up than his cross-town rival Guillermo Barros-Schelotto. And then outside of them, I mean, outside of those two, I think it would be a very left field choice if the AFA were to certainly turn to them. I mean, I'm an admirer of what Ariel Holan's done at Independiente, and certainly someone who does seem to have a very clear vision of how he wants football to be played and thinks long term. I think part of his sticking point with Independiente was the club buying into his ideas and sort of wanting to.
They could do a lot worse. I agree. So he comes across as a quality bloke as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of, yeah, as I say, I think he just sees football plays football in the right way and sees it going forward rather than in the short term. So I mean, it sort of contradicts how the rest of South America views football. But would be positive in terms of what we're talking about.
And that is also attractive from a commercial point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's something that has to be mentioned. Argentina are a commodity, and so the kind of coach who would have his team hanging off the crossbar like a collection of bats isn't great for the brand looking to sell friendlies around the world. So someone like that. I felt this a little bit when Basili came back, which was probably a little bit too late. Much though I loved him, and I loved his press conferences and so on. And I loved that voice that sounded like a porn star, an ex-porn star who smoked too many cigars. I was very disappointed with him when he didn't turn up to the press conference after that Copa America defeat in 2007. I thought that was disappointing. But anyway, I thought part of the reason that he got the job, when Peckerman jumped ship, was a recognition on the part of AFA that as an old style romantic kind of coach, that the spectacle would be there, that they could sell on for commercial reasons. I'm never sure how much that's a factor, but that for me would perhaps mitigate against a kind of Bilardo type figure, who was with a much more defensive approach.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think probably Peter's being a bit too cautious on the Holan chat because as an Independiente fan, he doesn't want to see him leave Avellaneda just yet. But yeah, I think Holan and Gallardo are probably the only two that you could really see. I think Gabriel Heinze is a very exciting manager, but it's far too soon in his career to be looking at the national team. I do wonder if there's a potential route for Matias Almeida.
Perhaps,
I know he's rumoured with Atlético Nacional or staying in Mexico, but he's done well with youngsters, and I think he's done all right in cup competitions. Another thing which I think is a feather in Gallardo's cap is just how well he's done in cup competitions, which would bode well for the national team. And I wonder if potentially Peckerman could be tempted as some kind of director of football, giving a bit more credence to a younger, more inexperienced coach like Scaloni. He's a well-respected elder statesman. He's got great experience working with youth, and maybe that's what the national team needs right now. I think you could maybe look back at some of his sort of key in-game decisions that he's made over the years in matches to say that you wouldn't necessarily want him as the manager in charge, but I think there's got to be some position in the AFA set up for him to at least kind of steer Argentina back, as much as you don't want to just look at old successes and just try them again.
Would be an interesting choice. I agree. I think he has a contribution to make, but please not as head coach.
Yeah,
you can't blow World Cup after World Cup after World Cup in the way that he's done it. Crunch decisions at big times. I honestly, I was ashamed of him with Colombia against England, Absolute shame of the way he betrayed everything that he stood for over the years. It was appalling. Don't think he was great when Colombia went out to Brazil 4 years earlier. I think 2006 was the World Cup that Argentina really should have won, and I think he blew that one in the end as well. So under pressure, I don't rate him to make the big decisions. Although I admire him a lot, and I think he's got a contribution to make. But please, not as head coach.
Yeah, I read today. I think he knocked back an opportunity to go back to Argentinos juniors. So he potentially might be keeping his options open to see if the AFA come calling in some capacity. But yeah, I think most people will go along with the two of you in that they'd like to see him in some supporting role behind the scenes, using some of his expertise that he obviously had in the past with the youth teams, rather than as head coach. Just one other person that obviously isn't going to be coming, but wanted to just see what either of you thought was Ricardo Gareca, who obviously held back from a sort of re-signing with staying on with Peru, but then said, no one from the AFA ever contacted him. Did you think he was a possibility?
Yes.
Yeah, I would have definitely liked to see him get involved as well, because again, I think he's the level of coach that Argentina can realistically attract these days. International football is not the elite competition that it used to be, so I think he's someone who would have come with certain respect within South America for what he's done at Vélez and what he's done at Peru, and he's got obviously that great track record of bringing through youngsters. So I think he would have been an ideal fit, really, and a missed opportunity for the AFA, really.
Very, very surprised I didn't go after him straight away. And what he did with Peru is just remarkable. Really, it really is remarkable. And he's taken a side that were a laughing stock away from home. That their away record in World Cup qualification was just absolutely disastrous. They hardly, and you can look at Peru, and for about 14 years they hardly even drew a World Cup qualifier away from home. And a lot of that was a mentality thing. And he worked with him. He identified his players. I think he had a little bit of luck in that at a vital stage there was that extra centenary Copa America in the United States that allowed him to regroup and work out who he wanted with him, who were the big hearts there, who were the people he could rely on, and they came out of that. From a team that honestly, and their away record was Luxembourg. To then go and be able to give France a decent game in the World Cup, and only lose narrowly to Holland and Germany now after taking the lead in both games. It's a monumental achievement, and he comes across as a respectable guy as well. So I was very surprised they didn't chase him after the World Cup.
Yeah, and I kind of got the impression that it was almost as if he was waiting to see if anything came up, and when it didn't, fair play, he thought, well, I'm doing pretty well where I am, so I'll stay put. But yeah, I did think it was curious that it wasn't even explored, and the AFA, even if they weren't rushing into a decision, didn't at least reach out and make it clear that he was under consideration. So they might live to regret that, depending on who we see come in.
Are you really surprised by the AFA, Peter, at this stage, after all this time?
Absolutely not. I think nothing surprises us anymore, sadly. So, I mean, as you mentioned, Tim, I guess the friendly against Brazil probably is going to be quite important in terms of whether or not we see more of Scaloni after that. But do you think the Brazil appointment, at the same time that Argentina obviously brought in Bausa and the fortunes of the two nations went in opposite directions, do you think that gives reason for optimism?
Yeah, I think it does. However, Brazil's coach didn't have to make a great deal of changes in personnel. It was a tactical switch and a switch of mentality more than anything else. And there were very few new players introduced initially. Whereas you look at the Argentina, the resources available to Argentina, and you worry. I mean, just think about it. Brazil during the World Cup had Marquinhos, centre back, on the bench. If he was Argentine, he could name his price. Brazil have Alisson and Ederson in goal. Argentina is nowhere near that. So that's the worrying thing. I think, whoever you bring in, you can wave his magic wand all over the place, but where is he going to get his goalkeeper, his fullbacks, and his centre backs from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like you mentioned, at fullbacks as well. The just wealth of talent that Brazil have compared to Argentina, it's just miles apart. And the fact that Brazil could leave Artur, I know he'd only probably had about a year of sort of senior football under his belt, but he would have transformed that Argentina midfield, I think. So I'll be interested to see if maybe Brazil go with some younger faces like Lucas Paquetá and Artur, and hopefully that might give Argentina a chance of not getting absolutely embarrassed. But
I think Artur will get a game. I don't think Paquetá will. Well, he's not anywhere near the level yet. And you can see, that they played their 2 games. In the first game against the States, it was really their World Cup team. And with just 1 or 2 little changes, and Artur, I think, has probably got in front of Fregi now. The new United signing. But I can't see there's going to be much experimentation. And it depends a little bit. Brazil are calling up this Friday before the places are defined in the final of the Brazilian Cup. And that looks like that's going to rule Paquetá and some of the domestic players out. So I fear for Argentina you're going to be up against the full strength thing, which just makes it fascinating. Bring it on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just to finalise then, Tom, if you were pushed at this point to name your next Argentina manager, who are you going for?
That is, can I say what I would like and what I think will happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'd like Gallardo, but I have a feeling that it will be Scaloni for a little while longer, hopefully at least with Peckerman as sort of some kind of help to him. But I have a feeling just the lack of money at the AFA might be quite a decisive factor in who they appoint. I don't think they'll be able to necessarily get someone like Martino. Why would he even go back after leaving, 2 years ago and because of the shambles? I don't think there's been any discernible improvement from the AFA. So I think Gallardo's due a move, time to move on from River. Whether he thinks that he wants a crack at Europe or somewhere else first will be interesting to see. But yeah, I think Gallardo should be the one they could go for.
And Tim?
Yeah, probably, but I always think with football, if you know what's going to happen, why bother watching it? Sit back, enjoy the ride, and make your predictions after the event.
Absolutely, and certainly we'll all be tuning in to enjoy the next friendlies, as they do have a lot riding on them. But I think we'll call it there. I want to thank you both, obviously, for coming on. I think we've got through a lot of stuff there in just under an hour, which is ideal. Tim, first of all, thanks very much for coming on, and hopefully
my
we'll
pleasure.
Do it again
Thank you for having me.
And
look forward to it.
Tom, as ever, thanks very much.
Cheers, Peter. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening as ever. Follow or subscribe to keep up to date when the next episode is available, or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. All the details are in the information below. Feel free to leave us a comment or any of the mentioned platforms, whether you have questions or requests, and we will try and get back to you. Thanks again, and we will speak again soon.